My fear is real. It's a physical response. Uncontrollable dread.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
The speaker begins by explaining that everyone has fears, but some fears are harder to explain than others. While many people are afraid of spiders, heights, darkness, or clowns, the speaker's fear is something most people laugh at when they hear it. The speaker is deeply terrified of children's toys, specifically small plastic building blocks. To outsiders, the fear seems irrational, even childish, but the speaker insists this fear was not formed from imagination, superstition, or exaggeration. It was created by pain, trauma, and a near-death experience that permanently altered the way their mind and body react to certain sensations. The speaker explains that the fear is not simply discomfort or dislike. It is a full physical response. Tightness in the chest, nausea, shaking hands, and an overwhelming sense of danger. Even seeing the toys in a store aisle or hearing the faint rattle of plastic pieces can trigger panic. Doctors have labeled it as post-traumatic stress, but the speaker believes labels do not fully capture the reality of what happened. The speaker clarifies that the fear did not begin in childhood, nor was it caused by stepping on the toys barefoot, as many people jokingly assume. The trauma began during the speaker's teenage years, when they were trying to earn money and gain independence. At that time, the speaker was known in their neighborhood as responsible, quiet, and dependable. Babysitting was not something they loved, but it was something they were good at. The speaker describes their early babysitting jobs as ordinary and predictable. Parents trusted them because they followed rules, kept children safe, and never complained. Over time, recommendations spread, and soon the speaker was babysitting multiple families, sometimes several times a week. The work became routine, until one request changed everything. One afternoon, the speaker received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. The woman on the other end sounded polite, calm, and slightly tired. She explained that she had received the speaker's number from another parent and was looking for someone reliable to watch her son. She mentioned that her family had recently moved to the area and that caring for her child required a bit more patience than usual. The speaker remembers hesitating. Something about the woman's voice felt rehearsed, almost overly controlled. Still, the offer paid well, and the speaker needed the money. When asked about the child's age, the woman paused briefly before answering, which the speaker later realized was the first warning sign. The speaker explains that they agreed to the job without asking many questions. Looking back, they recognize this as a mistake driven by financial pressure and youthful confidence. They assumed that all children were essentially the same, that patience and kindness could solve most problems. The babysitting job was scheduled for early evening, and the speaker was told to arrive just before sunset. The address was only a few blocks away, in a neighborhood the speaker believed they knew well. On the day of the job, the speaker left their house earlier than necessary. As they walked, they considered asking their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gloria, about the family. Mrs. Gloria had lived on the street for decades and knew everyone's business, but the speaker decided against it, assuming it would only lead to unnecessary gossip. The house, when the speaker arrived, looked ordinary. Neatly trimmed lawn, white porch railing, warm lights glowing from inside. Nothing about it suggested danger or secrecy. Before the speaker could knock, a woman from across the street stepped outside and called to them. She introduced herself as Mrs. Lois and explained that the speaker had the wrong address. She smiled warmly and gestured toward a larger house further down the road. The speaker describes Mrs. Lois as well-dressed, well-spoken, and confident. Her house was large and carefully maintained, far more impressive than the modest homes around it. Despite feeling a flicker of unease, the speaker trusted her. Inside the house, the speaker was greeted by Mr. Al, Mrs. Lois's husband. He praised the speaker's reputation and thanked them for coming on such short notice. His friendliness felt excessive, almost rehearsed. Cameras were visible in the corners of the room, which Mr. Al explained were for security. The speaker was then introduced to the child they were supposed to watch. At first, the speaker thought it was a life-sized plastic figure leaning against the wall. The speaker quickly realized the figure was a living person. The boy, named Edward, was not a child at all. He was a fully grown adult, unusually large, with distorted features and unfocused eyes. He wore diapers and held a handful of small plastic building blocks, clenching them tightly. Edward did not speak in full sentences. Instead, he made sounds and laughed unpredictably. The speaker felt immediate fear and confusion. This was not the job they had agreed to. The speaker recalls trying to leave politely, but Mr. Al insisted everything would be fine. He assured the speaker that Edward was harmless and simply needed supervision. Mrs. Lois watched silently from across the room, her expression unreadable. Against their better judgment, the speaker stayed. Edward suddenly approached the speaker and pressed the plastic blocks against their face. The pressure was hard and painful. He laughed loudly and repeated a single word. "Play?" The speaker tried to gently push him away, but Edward's strength was overwhelming. The blocks scraped against the speaker's skin, leaving red marks. The speaker realized the toys were not clean. They smelled faintly of metal and something sour. Edward's behavior escalated rapidly. He shoved the blocks into the speaker's mouth, forcing their jaw open with brute force. The speaker describes the intense pain as sharp edges cut into their gums and tongue. Breathing became difficult. The speaker remembers thinking that something so small should not be able to cause so much damage. The speaker tried to remain calm, aware of the cameras watching their every move. They attempted to placate Edward by handing him other toys, calling them food, hoping to redirect his attention. For a brief moment, it worked. Without warning, Edward attacked again, pushing more blocks into the speaker's mouth and pressing down on their throat. Panic took over. The speaker kicked out in desperation, managing to break free. That was when Mr. Al stormed into the room, furious, not at Edward, but at the speaker. Mrs. Lois appeared holding a knife. Her calm demeanor vanished, replaced by cold rage. The speaker realized then that this was not an accident. This was intentional. The speaker used pepper spray they carried for safety, spraying wildly. The pain and chaos allowed them to escape the house. Neighbors witnessed the speaker collapse outside, coughing and choking. An ambulance was called. Doctors later removed multiple plastic pieces from the speaker's throat and stomach. The couple was arrested. Authorities revealed they were not Edward's parents. Edward had been kidnapped years earlier and manipulated into violence. The speaker explains that Edward was the true victim. He was later placed in a psychiatric facility where he began receiving proper care. Over time, he came to view the speaker as a protective figure rather than a toy. The speaker's fear never disappeared, but it evolved. The blame shifted from Edward to the people who had turned him into a weapon. The narrative shifts away from the speaker's personal trauma and moves into a separate but disturbingly connected series of events. Several months after the babysitting incident, a small town roughly 40 miles away experienced a string of violent deaths that would later be referred to by the media as the block murders. The first victim was a 19-year-old college student named Daniel Harper, found dead behind a closed convenience store. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull. There were no witnesses, no signs of robbery, and no clear motive. However, one detail immediately stood out to investigators. Near Daniel's body, police discovered a small plastic construction worker toy, partially crushed and stained with blood. At first, officers assumed it belonged to a nearby child and dismissed it as irrelevant. But when the medical examiner confirmed the time of death, it became clear the toy had been placed deliberately after the killing. The toy was logged into evidence, largely ignored and stored away. 2 weeks later, another teenager was found dead under nearly identical circumstances. This time, the victim was a 17-year-old girl discovered behind an abandoned bus depot. Once again, the cause of death was blunt force trauma. And once again, a plastic toy, this time a firefighter figure, was found near the body. This pattern was no longer coincidence. Federal authorities were brought in after a third body was discovered. FBI Special Agent Raymond Cowley was assigned to the case, partnered with local officer Brad Mullins. The media attention intensified and fear spread quickly through the community. Cowley immediately noticed the similarity between the crime scenes. The toys were not random. They were placed carefully, almost respectfully, as if they were meant to be found. Agent Cowley interviewed Daniel Harper's parents. They were devastated, struggling to understand how their son could be targeted. During the interview, Cowley noticed Daniel's younger brother Jim sitting on the floor, quietly assembling a plastic figure. It was identical to the one found at the crime scene. When asked where he got the toy, Jim responded calmly that a kid who went to heaven gave it to him. The room fell silent. Jim showed no signs of distress or fear. He spoke as if he were describing something ordinary. Cowley asked him to explain further, but Jim refused to say anything else. The toy was confiscated for evidence. Forensic testing later revealed traces of blood on it that did not belong to Daniel or any of the other victims. This discovery suggested a deeper history behind the murders. Cowley and Brad reviewed missing persons cases and death records involving children. One name kept resurfacing: Rory Bennett, a 6-year-old boy who vanished 4 years earlier. His disappearance had received little attention at the time due to his family's financial situation and lack of influence. Rory's body had been discovered months later in a wooded area outside town, mutilated and partially decomposed. The case file was thin: no suspects, no arrests, no follow-up. The boy's death had quietly faded from public memory. Officer Brad expressed visible shame as he admitted that the department had failed Rory. Budget constraints, understaffing, and unspoken bias had all played a role in the neglect of the case. The investigation led Cowley and Brad to Crimson Ridge High School, where Rory's mother had once worked as a cleaning assistant. The principal, Mr. Morgan, greeted the officers with polite professionalism. He denied any knowledge of Rory's disappearance beyond what had been reported years earlier. However, during the conversation, the school janitor interrupted. The janitor explained that a woman named Diana, Rory's mother, had been acting strangely since her son's disappearance. She often returned to the school late at night, wandering the halls, crying and muttering to herself. Students had complained that she frightened them. Diana had eventually been dismissed from her job. Cowley requested access to school records from the night Rory disappeared. After some hesitation, the principal provided detention logs. 4 students had been assigned detention that evening and were still inside the building after staff had left. All 4 were now among the teenagers who had been murdered. Cowley and Brad requested to speak with Mr. Morgan again. This time, the principal appeared tense. His composure cracked when Cowley mentioned Rory's name. The officers noticed a locked door near the school kitchen that did not appear on the official floor plan. They demanded access. Morgan refused. Brad forced the door open. Inside, they discovered a teenage boy bound to a chair, alive but terrified. He matched the description of the 4th student who had been in detention that night years ago, the only one still alive. Before the officers could free him, Morgan entered the room holding a gun. Morgan confessed everything. Rory had been his son. On the night Rory was killed, Morgan had caught the 4 teenagers smoking drugs in the school. Rory had wandered into the building looking for his father. The teens panicked, assaulted the child, and fled. Morgan had found Rory's body too late. The police dismissed the case as an accident. Morgan never forgave them. Years later, he tracked down the teenagers one by one. He killed 3 of them and planned to kill the 4th that night. The plastic toys were Rory's, left behind as a message. Morgan attempted to turn the gun on himself. Brad fired first, stopping him. Morgan survived long enough to be arrested. The murders ended, but the town was permanently scarred. The narrative returns to the speaker, who reflects on how stories of violence and grief seem to follow them throughout their life. The speaker admits that curiosity had always driven them toward dark places, even after everything they had endured. This curiosity would lead to one final incident. The speaker explains that despite everything they had experienced, violence, fear, and near death, they never fully lost their sense of curiosity. While others sought excitement through parties or reckless behavior, the speaker was drawn to abandoned places, not for thrills, but for understanding. Empty buildings felt like physical memories, structures left behind by lives interrupted. Exploring abandoned houses became a quiet habit. The speaker never vandalized, never stole, and never stayed long. They simply observed, listened, imagined what had once existed there. One particular house sat on the outskirts of the city, just beyond the last row of functioning streetlights. It was known locally as the untouched house. Unlike most abandoned buildings, it showed no signs of decay. Windows were intact, the lawn was trimmed, the paint had not peeled. That alone should have been a warning. The speaker planned to explore the house with a friend named Peter. Peter treated urban exploration as a game, something to laugh about later. He arrived late, forcing the speaker to enter alone at first. Inside, the house felt unnaturally clean. No dust, no debris, no smell of mold or rot. The air felt colder with every step. To keep track of explored areas, the speaker marked doorframes with small yellow paint symbols, something they had done dozens of times before. Each room on the first floor was empty, too empty. No furniture, no signs of life. When Peter finally arrived, he laughed at the markings and called the house boring. The second floor felt different immediately. The temperature dropped sharply. The speaker noticed their breath fogging in the air. At the end of the hallway was a single locked door. No other door in the house had been locked. Peter forced the door open. Inside was a bedroom filled wall to wall with small plastic building blocks, hundreds, maybe thousands. They covered the floor like gravel. The speaker froze. Before they could react, their foot slipped. They fell hard onto the blocks. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, sharp edges digging into skin, joints, and bone. The sensation triggered a violent physical response: nausea, panic, memory. The door slammed shut. The speaker screamed for Peter, but their voice failed. The blocks beneath them shifted unnaturally, crawling and tightening against their body. Each movement caused fresh pain, as if the toys were alive. Through the door's narrow window, the speaker saw Peter standing in the hallway, also covered in blocks that clung to his skin. Then the room changed. A pale boy appeared at the foot of the bed. His skin was grey, his eyes sunken, dried blood streaking his face. He looked no older than 6. He did not speak aloud, but the speaker understood his message clearly. "Do not come back." The boy vanished. The blocks fell still. The door unlocked. The speaker crawled out of the room, collapsing onto the hallway floor. The pain was unbearable, but the house was silent again. Peter suddenly appeared beside them, confused, claiming he had just arrived and had never entered the house. The speaker fled alone. They never returned. Peter later stopped answering messages altogether. Doctors couldn't explain the bruises and puncture wounds covering the speaker's body. No foreign objects were found, no logical cause. But the pain remained. The speaker concludes by reflecting on the pattern that followed them throughout life, how trauma echoes, how violence leaves marks long after events end. The toys were never the real threat. People were. Grief was. Neglect was. Yet fear does not care about logic. Every time the speaker now sees those plastic blocks, their body reacts before their mind can intervene. Their throat tightens. Their skin aches. Their stomach churns. The wounds never
healed,
fully healed.
but they never really closed. Fear doesn't need monsters. Sometimes it just needs memory.